The title of today's talk is Psychiatry in the City, the Mental Health Consequences of Sprawl and Walkability. Our speaker is Dr. Jackson Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds is a PGY2 psychiatry resident at the U of A Phoenix and a PGY5 overall, as he previously completed a MedPeds residency here, also at the U of A Phoenix. Dr. Reynolds does not have any financial interests or affiliations with any products or companies that may create a conflict of interest with the topic of this program. If he does have a conflict of interest, he will disclose this information in his presentation. Please help me welcome Dr. Reynolds.
Hello, everybody. If I can get a thumbs up or something that y'all can hear me. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. All right. So thanks for the introduction, Dr. Escarica. So as she said, I am Dr. Jackson Reynolds, MedPeds trained, now here in psychiatry, getting additional training. Throughout my training and from the beginning, my interests have been quite variegated within medicine, and they've always sat at different intersections and crossroads, specifically between medicine, lifestyle, environmental factors, public health, diet, exercise, sleep, but specifically and quite particularly the built environment, particularly as it pertains to physical health and mental health. So this talk is going to be about how urban design kind of quietly infiltrates every single one of those domains. Some of these effects are very obvious, but most of them are kind of invisible until you start looking for them. But once you see them, they really cannot be unseen. So let me advance here. Okay, maybe not. There we go. All right. As Maddie said, no disclosures. So why this talk and why now? So in 2025, we are quite literally standing at a crossroads. The post-war experiment of low-density suburban dispersal has reached a point where it is fully mature, and its consequences are also on full display. Decades of zoning policy choices, highway buildings have resulted not in the promised freedom, but in isolation, long commutes, air pollution, obesity, loneliness, and significant economic fragility and liability at the local and national level. The images here tell the story of this history. So in the bottom right is Levittown, New York, which was essentially the first tract suburb ever built in the United States right after World War II. This pattern of design began to influence essentially what we see now across the entire country. Rows of single-family homes that are pretty much uniform, kind of an urban design monoculture that is built for access exclusively by cars and does not prioritize human scale or reachability or walkability outside of that one transit modality. Above it to the left, we see Pioneer Square in Seattle, also previously choked with cars within a central urban area, but now re-pedestrianized and more vibrant than ever because of that. These photos represent the history, present, and possible future of the American built environment, one showing a total prioritization of vehicle movement, and the other prioritizing life between buildings. And we're at the point where we need to decide societally and collectively what kind of environment we want to normalize for the next century. We cannot understand our patients without understanding their environment. All of this may seem to have minimal relevance to psychiatry or even medicine, so I want to dig into those things now. This excellent book by 2011 by Edward Glaser, Trying for the City, has a really interesting passage that I want to read that illustrates this. For the first time in history, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. In a time when family, friends, and coworkers are a call, text, or email away, 3.3 billion people on the planet still choose to crowd together in skyscrapers, high-rises, subways, and buses. Now more than ever, the well-being of human society depends upon our knowledge of how the city lives and breathes. The point of this is that cities are not necessarily pathological nor salvific by default. They're simply just a condensation of humanity, and our task is to make that condensation as healthy as possible, as efficiently as possible. All of us in medical school were taught plenty about pathophysiology, pharmacology, anatomy, biochemistry, but we learned nothing for most of us, most likely, about the built environment or other environmental factors that have direct and massive impacts on well-being. To clarify, however, this is not a talk that is disparaging rural America or even about rural America at all. Rural America and rural mental health is an entirely different conversation about access, telehealth, social capital, and it deserves its own presentation. This conversation and this presentation is about these two things here on the right: a dense urban area and a low density suburban area, not a rural area. When Glaser mentions that more than half the world's population lives in cities, he's not saying that most of the world's population lives in something like we see here on the right. That's really not true. They live within the municipal boundaries of cities, but most people worldwide living within those boundaries, and especially in the United States and Canada, are living, and Australia, are living in an environment that looks like this here in the middle. This environment used to look like this at the periphery of something like this, but has now mowed this down essentially to build these low density, sprawling suburban areas. And the consequences of living in this kind of environment on the right versus this kind of environment on the middle is what we're addressing, specifically the contrast between dense urban cores and low density suburban environments. These are two poles that most define most modern psychiatric exposures from an urbanism standpoint. What do I hope you all get out of this talk? Essentially, by the end of this, if you understand how design choices from the top down, such as zoning, transit, and land use decisions, function very, very directly and causally as psychiatric determinants of health, as well as knowing a little bit about what we can do about those things as physicians, then I have done my job. So where do we start? This 2004 book kind of did for urban planning and health what Durkheim's Suicide did in the late 1800s for sociology. It quantified something that we only had intuitive and folk ideas about before. In the same way that Durkheim quantified suicide risk based on interpersonal connections and religiosity and finances and meaning at work, things like that, this book by Frumkin, Frank, and Jackson quantified the direct and extremely important connections between the environment and the built environment and health. They analyzed how sprawl specifically affects asthma, cardiovascular disease, obesity, hospitalization rates. A striking example being, for instance, the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, very busy. City officials said most people are not going to be able to easily find parking downtown. They strongly incentivized transit use during that time. Traffic did drop dramatically and air quality improved, leading to a plummeting of hospitalization rates for asthma, which went right back up after the Olympics concluded. These kind of natural experiments and observational data, which are obviously what we have to go on with very few RCTs being in this kind of domain, are explored at length in this book, and it's very good reading for any physician in any specialty. But why it's important here is because this book's publication in 2004 marked the moment when city planning specifically and officially entered the medical conversation. So city planning and health pathways. This slide shows two completely different worlds that are indeed separated by an ocean, but by more than an ocean in the way that their design impacts human behavior. On the left is the Katy Freeway in Houston. This is the widest highway in the United States, one of the widest in the world. And on the right, we see a Dutch streetscape where children can bike freely amongst very slow traffic with transit prioritized in the middle of the street with this streetcar here. This illustrates that urban form shapes all daily exposures: movement, noise, air quality, heat, safety, amenity access. Everything is directly impacted by urban form. And every design choice, bike lane, sidewalk, tree cover, or lack thereof, shifts psychiatric risk. Car-centric cities are offering nothing but constant low-grade stressors, whereas human-scale cities designed for people and not for cars are therapeutic by default. So a lot of this is from 30,000 feet. What does this mean clinically? This is the pivot point. So we've set up this framework. Now I want to walk through one by one how these exposures translate directly into mental health outcomes, starting with the most universal stressor in American society, which is the daily automobile commute for workers. So time, mode, and mood relative to commute. Studies have consistently shown that the longer the solo commute, the lower the life satisfaction, even when controlling for other factors such as income. Stutzer and Frey quantified this with an interesting study showing that directly and not even linearly, but to a degree exponentially, each additional minute in traffic erodes mood and even marriage stability, increasing risk of divorce for people with greater than 90 minutes a day of solo automobile commutes to and from a suburban area into a job in the city. In the fascinating moment-by-moment affect studies highlighted in Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman et al., we see people being given little buzzers, essentially asking them at different points throughout the day, hey, I'm going to randomly ping you and ask on a scale of 0 to 10, from miserable to euphoric, how much are you enjoying what you're doing right now? Well, socializing with others, having intercourse, eating chocolate, things that obviously are enjoyable, ranked really, really high in these moment-by-moment affect studies. But what's interesting is what shows up on the opposite pole of that. In these studies, people rate driving, specifically in congestion, as one of the least satisfying activities that we regularly perform, rating it worse than cleaning toilets or changing a poopy diaper. The point of this is not to make a moral judgment on driving or commuting by car, but it's simply to make a biochemical observation. Prolonged isolation, sensory monotony, loss of control, all of which are typified and encouraged and caused by this mode of travel, they all raise cortisol, and they do so chronically. It's an interesting natural experiment in that the commute has become kind of a modern experiment in learned helplessness and also in forced immobility. So what about steps? What about mobility? What about freedom and choice to move? We know that depression risk begins to plummet once people consistently exceed about 7,500 steps per day walking. And this is obvious why. Exercise increases endogenous BDNF, it lowers inflammation, it restores circadian rhythm. We're all familiar with the famous 2015 Duke study showing near equal efficacy to SSRI in mild depression for patients randomized to either the standard pharmacotherapy or about half an hour of exercise a few times per week of just moderate intensity. Built environment dictates compliance with these kinds of recommendations, which we can make until we're blue in the face as physicians, but it's easier said than done. I can tell you all day you should get 75,000 steps and eat, plenty of fiber, but unless it's environmentally easy to do those things, people won't. Something we'll come to pretty shortly. Walkable neighborhoods make movement effortless, but sprawl kind of turns it into a chore. On the right, we see an environment where walking is part of daily tasks. It's just normal because of density, because of mixed use development. But on the left, we see an environment where walking is still absolutely possible, but somewhat in a bimodal distribution. For the poor and disadvantaged, it is along the polluted and choked sidewalks, dangerously on the side of this multi-lane strode. But for the privileged and wealthy, it is by driving to the gym so you can walk on the treadmill, something that should strike us as completely insane, but is normalized. Different environments change our ability and willingness to make different choices. And when the default is something healthy, it's not a choice at all. It's just something that's going to happen automatically. So, what about social connection? Social connection is profoundly shaped by design. Walkability and transit are not luxuries for rich areas in wealthy cities in first world nations. These are psychiatric infrastructure pieces that everyone around the world should have access to in cities large and small. When cities force you to drive everywhere, spontaneous contact between people disappears into thin air. Every interaction has to be scheduled, which means that most interactions do not happen. The data on this are also quite clear in the literature. If you have limited alternatives to car and personal automobile transport, you will score causally in a higher loneliness index, especially older adults and adolescents. And this makes sense, right? Children cannot drive, and if the only way to get from point A to point B is driving, you are dependent on someone else to go anywhere. And if you're an older adult and you're trapped in an area like this, and you, for health reasons or anything else, vision, what have you, cannot drive, your house has suddenly become a prison unless you can afford a taxi or you have someone to drive you around every time you need to get anywhere to do anything. So in contrast to that, places that are very well connected by transit and well connected in safe walkability, they naturally buffer against isolation. They create what sociologists call unplanned proximity, where serendipitous interactions can happen automatically. Both photos on the left are streets in close proximity to each other in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. In the 1970s, the nation was completely choked with automobiles. You can see here, who is the king of the road? It is only those in private automobiles. Pedestrians are marginalized on the side, and cyclists are trying to inch their way through, playing Frogger in this, maelstrom of giant metal death machines. Over here, we see a lot of Amsterdam as it is today, especially in the central city, where these kinds of streets have been converted by deliberate top-down design choices to favor human traffic on cycle and on foot and on transit over automobiles. This is not some dystopian authoritarian ban on cars. It's simply a change in what is convenient and what people want to do by default because of what is convenient and easy. We see here that a car can still drive down this street, but it's impossible for a car to drive down this street at 55 miles per hour without getting into a wreck, without getting into a crash, which means that it's safe for children and the elderly and everyone to walk and cycle and live their lives on this street. Design can either trap us or liberate us socially, and it is up to us to make those design decisions. What about noise? Noise is a very much underappreciated psychiatric and cardiometabolic toxin. Let's kind of dispel myth number one here. Myth number one is that cities are loud. They are, in the Dickensian sense, these polluted, miserable, grimy cesspits of honking horns and spewing factory spires that are inherently anti-human and hostile in their design. What is making the miserable noise and the grime is not the fact that there's density by itself, but it is, again, cars. Cars are what is loud. Vehicle traffic, in studies looking at noise sources in the urban environments, are the overwhelming dominant source of all urban noise by a massive margin compared with anything else. We know from very interesting studies in humans and non-human animals that chronic road noise elevates cortisol, fragments sleep, and even without being consciously aware of it, keeps the amygdala kind of half primed all day long in a state of hypervigilance that we know is chronically stressful from the level of the psyche to the endothelium. The stopgap solutions to this are all the time thrown out and mentioned. Let's lower the speed limit. Let's use porous or rubberized pavement. Let's put in vegetation buffers. Let's orient buildings away from traffic corridors. These things work, but they treat only the symptoms of this disease. They do not treat the cause. The best mitigation is distance. Do not run highways through places where people want to live, walk, learn, and heal. The biggest thing we can do is undo the mistake of the last century of cutting freeways directly through the center of dense urban areas, usually through the marginalized neighborhoods of people of color, as we saw throughout the 20th century, in neighborhoods that did not have the political privilege to prevent the destruction of their own urban fabric for highway renewal projects a la Robert Moses and the rest. Every decibel that we remove from the city by reducing car traffic, especially through central areas, will buy back a little bit of mental silence. Noise is not the only thing in the air, however. There's a lot of particulate matter in the air, and its source should not surprise you. Traffic-related PM 2.5 and NO2 associate with depressive and anxiety symptoms in multiple cohort and umbrella reviews. Air pollution does not stop at the lungs. However, these particles that come directly from combustion engines, but also increasingly from microplastics shed by tires, even of electric cars, which produce more tire-based microplastic pollution than do combustion engine cars because of their higher weight, torque, and tire degradation rate, become airborne neurotoxins. These neurotoxins increase levels of depression and anxiety. Those symptoms climb, but mechanistically, what is happening? Neuroinflammation is happening. Oxidative stress is happening. Vascular injury in the PFC and other areas are happening. We know that these particles are small enough to be breathed in and that they're polluting everything from multiple studies. But what is fascinating is that despite the amount of plastic trash and pollution that we have in our daily life from things like disposable water bottles, for instance, the vast majority of microplastics found in studies to be polluting the environment are not from those sources. A recent study looking at water in the San Francisco Bay found that about 78% of the microplastics polluting the water could be traced back to either tire degradation or road paint. The photo here, it hits close to home. This is Interstate 75 in my home state of Georgia, which cuts directly through downtown Atlanta. It is the perfect case study in total design malpractice. Over 12 lanes carving through the core of the neighborhood, not only severing connections between previously connected neighborhoods, but funneling exhaust directly into the densest area of the city where air quality should be cleanest. But of course, this was preventable. We built it this way and we can unbuild it. Large arterial roads used to run through parts of suburban Amsterdam, and other roads which allowed cars to travel directly through the center of the city at high speed previously existed in the middle of the 20th century, but they've since been rerouted such that if you want a direct and fast route through the city, that will only happen on foot, on cycle, or on public transit. But if you want to take a private automobile from one side to the other, you can do that, but you'll need to go all the way around the city in an inconvenient, long, and circuitous route. So again, framing choices by changing design principles. What about urban heat? This should hit close to home to us here in Phoenix. Heat is a psychiatric exposure. We know this looking at bipolar and other illnesses that are worse during times of heat, like heat switching on mania for patients. But higher temperatures correlate with more emergency department visits, not just for physical issues like rhabdo and heat stroke, but for mental health crises. And at the extremes, studies show that suicide rates rise measurably with increased heat. But heat does not appear from nowhere. Even in Phoenix, we largely manufactured this. Phoenix used to be much, much cooler, quite literally, but we tore down the orange groves, and the hospital that I am presenting this from right now is built on the site of a former orange grove outside of downtown, and replaced them all with asphalt and surface parking and single-family homes of low density, which have raised surface albedo, trap radiant heat, and the low density sprawl throughout the valley has amplified this effect massively, such that every extra road, every parking lot is kind of a solar battery that is charged by day and then releases its heat into the city at night, keeping temperatures above 90 in the summer in the valley here. Urban heat islands are not the inevitable byproducts of meteorology. They are design failures. What about the big elephant in the room? Traffic violence and trauma. Most car accidents are not accidents at all. They are preventable crashes that are the result of bad design. More than 40,000 Americans die on the road every single year. This is totally fine and totally normal and is just the price we have to pay, is what we tell ourselves. And there's no other way we could do things. I wonder if things would be similar if a fully loaded passenger jet crashed somewhere in the United States every day and killed every person on board, because this is the equivalent to that and is in fact worse by the numbers. Road trauma does not end at the crash site. 1 in 5 survivors of motor vehicle accidents developed clinically diagnosable PTSD, and countless witnesses develop hypervigilance, anxiety behind the wheel. But it's not just people on the road dealing with this. It's also pedestrians who live with the subtler form of worse chronic stress. The constant background fear of being struck, like 191 people were fatally in 2019 in Phoenix alone. Programs like Vision Zero are great, but again, they only address people's choices. Let's design a road so you can drive comfortably at 65 miles an hour, but post a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit and just hope people obey it. That is not the way to go about this. The ultimate injury prevention is not better airbags. It is fewer cars. The best way to eliminate traffic trauma is to design environments where driving is not mandatory. But here's the problem. It kind of is. Here we're going to mark a shift in tone. Everything we've discussed lives under one idea, what I want to call the geography of the mind. So this is all fine and good, but is it just personal choice? Can I just tell my patients, okay, why don't you drive less? Why don't you just move somewhere better designed? Obviously not. This is not a tenable solution. This excellent book by Charles Montgomery makes the case that choice has been designed out of most modern cities. He asks, if you woke up this morning and decided to try a completely different method of going to work, could you do it? Could you walk? Could you ride a bike? Could you catch a bus or a train that would get you there in the time it took to read the paper? Now take it further. Does getting to a grocery store or doctor's office or restaurant without a car seem like a pretty big chore? Can your children walk or cycle?
Your next appointment, if you even need a follow-up like that in regards to any type of medication for
Could everybody
cravings.
please
So you may
mute their
not.
mic?
You, either myself or her assistant, one of us will reach out to you.
Hi there. Could you please mute your mic? Thank you. All right. Does getting to a grocery store or doctor's office or restaurant without a car seem like a chore? Can your children walk or cycle safely to school on their own? If these questions seem unreasonable, then chances are that real choice has been designed out of the city. The point he's making here is that when you build everything around cars, you build around compulsion. You don't choose to drive in suburban Dallas or Phoenix. You have to drive. And this is the psychological tension that we're talking about. It's the illusion of ultimate freedom in an environment that actually offers significant constraints. This slide shows what that loss of choice looks like numerically. Want to go from DFW airport to downtown Dallas? No problem. 21 minutes by car. Or how about over an hour by transit? What about LAX to Venice Beach? Well, that's only 28 minutes by car, but 71 by transit. Nobody is going to voluntarily spend 3 times as long commuting if the alternative is faster, subjectively feels safer even if it isn't, and is more comfortable. The result is self-reinforcing. Design for cars so everyone drives, so you keep designing for cars. Look at the walking times here. 8 hours for this trip in Dallas, 3 hours in between LAX and Venice Beach. Cycling isn't better either. This is how design quietly dictates behavior. Nothing here is forbidding anyone from walking or taking transit. It just makes it untenable and absurd for anyone who has the choice to drive. What about choice architecture? That's the biggest thing. Donald Shoup summed this up beautifully in his book, The High Cost of Free Parking. He says when it comes to public policy, doing the right thing is more important than doing it for the right reason. The best way to get people to do what's right collectively is to make it the best thing for them to do individually. You have to give individuals a personal incentive to do what's right for society. This is behavioral economics summed up in a couple of sentences. And if you change the default, you change the color, and you change the culture, and you change choice architecture. Look at organ donation. In the US, it's an opt-in situation, and because you have to opt in, there's very low participation rates. But in much of Europe, it's opt-out, nearly universal participation rates. Everyone in those situations has identical choice. You can always choose whether or not you want to be an organ donor, but if the opt-in is the default, it's seen as socially normal, and few people choose to opt out. Choice architecture is the cousin of psychiatry. Both of these things are about making healthy behaviors the easy one, which is the goal of psychotherapy as well. So, a tale of two cities, not a la Dickens. We're going to compare two cities that have the same population but radically different psychogeographies. One city built completely for people, and one city built completely for the needs of the automobile. Let's look at Houston and let's look at Paris, two famous cities. Houston's the fourth largest city in the United States. It is a behemoth. It's massive, but they have a lot in common, which is very interesting. Houston has about 2 million people. Paris has about 2 million people. But look at the difference. Houston sprawls over 1,600 square kilometers with a density of 1,389 people per square kilometer. Paris puts its entire population in only 105 square kilometers, about 20,000 people per kilometer, nearly a 20-fold difference in density between these cities. This is a famous photo on the top here of Houston, downtown Houston in the 1970s. This is what peak car dependency looks like. Almost every surface is a parking lot. Thankfully, Houston doesn't look like this today, but the scars are still there. You can feel the differences between these two places. This Parisian streetscape with massive density and green space and tight human scale design invites you to linger. This tells you, my goodness, I need to get in my car and get on this highway and go back home as quickly as possible, because what is there to do? What draws me to this area that is just asphalt? These are radically different daily exposures in these cities by default. How many steps will you take? How much noise will you hear? How much heat will you feel? What is the air quality? What is the auto crash risk? And what serendipitous social contexts will I have? Let's illustrate this further between these two cities. This is Houston on the left. This red area is Paris, the city limits to scale. This is the metro system of Paris. And this is the metro system, this is rail specifically, of Houston. This system sprawls across this entire area. This dense system fits only in this tiny 105 square kilometer area. The entirety of Paris fits within the central ring road around downtown Houston. This shows that the consequence is not, just congestion in a city that is spread out, but it's congestion despite things being low density. There is more congestion in the low density area of Houston than there is in Paris. The one design increases stress, time scarcity, and isolation, and the other one does the exact opposite. Also think about just the finances of how much easier it is to fund something like this inside this tiny area versus something like this with poor ridership because it's over such a giant area. Okay, but isn't density a huge problem? If we pack people together, isn't air quality going to be absolutely garbage? Well, this is often the pushback you get. If we crowd more people together, won't emissions be worse? Won't smog be worse? Won't health be worse? Well, in practice, the opposite happens when design is intentional and intelligent. Under Anne Hidalgo in Paris, who took office in 2014 as mayor, the entire city undertook a top-down redesign. Many boulevards have been fully pedestrianized. Protected bike lanes have been put in through the entire city, and car traffic has been severely restricted in the central area, with some areas not allowing car traffic at all. By 2022, cyclists literally outnumbered the number of cars on major corridors, to show you how dramatic this effect was over just a couple of years. This shows you the air quality between 2007 and 2012, no meaningful difference. But 2017, here we are 5 years later, things are looking better. And in 2022, there have been dramatic changes. The only areas that are still showing as bad and toxic are around, again, the arterial roads and the ring road. So density is not the villain. Uncontrolled traffic is the villain. What changed in Paris was geometry and political will, nothing else. So, what about autonomy? Everything we've seen leads to this idea. Autonomy is not a mindset, it is a spatial condition. Let's look at how design gives or takes away freedom to move, to connect, and to live, with another quote from Charles Montgomery's excellent book. He said, the most important psychological effect of the city is the way in which it moderates our relationship with other people. That phrase is the nucleus of this entire talk. Cities are machines for social life, and the form they have dictates how and how often we will collide with other human beings, be that a friendly social collision on the street or a fiery collision of automobiles on a 16-lane freeway. A well-designed street gives you constant micro moments of eye contact, glances, overheard snippets, spontaneous hellos, but sprawl strips away the ability to have those things and replaces them with isolation that is always in motion. The city will either amplify connection or attenuate it, and that is the deepest psychological effect of the city. What is that called? What does this look like logistically? This is what transportation researchers call the 5 Ds of travel behaviors. These Ds are the deterministic points of travel behavior. What is the density of the area? What is the diversity of the land use? What is the design of the street? What is the distance to transit? And what is the accessibility of the destination? These 5 factors predict everything. This photo looks very benign. You could find a million photos like this online on Google Images. But it is a case study in social asphyxiation by systemic design. Let's say you are a child who lives in this house right here, and your best friend lives right here. To go 300 feet as the crow flies is probably going to require a 1-mile drive or more. No kid can walk across this street safely alone without ending up a statistic. No elderly neighbor can walk across this with a walker or a cane in any meaningful way up this berm and across these zipping lanes of traffic. These choices these choices of design are removing choices in the way that we can move. And when everything depends on a car, serendipity dies. These 5 Ds are not abstract ideas about the way that a city is set up. They are the design grammar of whether or not people will be truly free or imprisoned with the illusion of freedom in their cities. Let's have a pop culture reference from Green Day's spectacular album, American Idiot, from 2024. The entire album is basically an existential crisis set to fantastic power chords. At the center of the earth in the parking lot of the 7-Eleven where I was taught. This line captures the entire generation's geography of despair. These lyrics were written by the band members as kids growing up in suburban Oakland, surrounded by asphalt, urban monoculture, total sameness. They felt that the places they were growing up as kids were spiritually vacant, city of the damned. No one really seems to care. This is not just vanilla teenage angst. It is environmental determinism in rock opera form. Art often diagnoses pathology before medicine does, and Jesus of Suburbia is a fantastic 9-minute magnum opus diagnostic indictment of what this system looks like from the inside. What about quality of density, though? You can cram people together all you want, and you're not going to have better outcomes. Density alone solves absolutely nothing. This Soviet-style block, I don't know where this photo is, but I found this online. This Soviet-esque or Soviet-style block, which could be in Turkmenistan, could be in North Korea, could be in the old Soviet Union, and it would fit in perfectly, proves everything I'm trying to say here. This is tall. Box checked. It's dense. Box checked. Amazing. But it's also totally lifeless and miserable. Good design is humane density, short blocks, truly mixed uses, green relief, eyes on the street, a la Jane Jacobs. The goal is not to warehouse people vertically, but it's to have proximity with purpose. We want people to be close enough to see each other, but also have a reason to go outside. If people live in this building, which it looks like they do, sure, they live in a dense way, but who's going to go outside and mingle in this miserable dystopian environment? High-rise dystopias and endless suburban sprawl are 2 sides of the same miserable and lonely coin. Here is what the difference looks like. On the right, we have my favorite neighborhood in Berlin, Prenzlauer, filled with pre-war buildings, tree-lined streets, ground floor cafes, people walking everywhere, groceries, cafes, shops. It is marvelous. I love walking here in the fall. It is a beautiful place, very human scale with infinite and endless street activity. On the left is a model mock-up of Le Corbusier's early 20th century proposed plan for master plan for Paris. The idea was Paris is dense and it sucks because it's dirty and people can't get around. We need to bulldoze the entirety of old Paris and build these giant identical tower slabs, which will fix the problem of low-rise density. And also, we need to stop having these cafes and stuff right under where people are living. Let's put that in a different area. Let's have the restaurant district here, and the school district here, and the recreation district here, and the work district here, and pack everyone into these towers. And no big deal. If you need to go do something, you can just get in your car and get on one of these giant arterials and go to that place. This is a high density design, likely higher density than even Prenzlauerberg is today, but it's a horrible and lifeless design that designs alienation into density. Density is absolutely necessary, but it is never sufficient. It is the quality of interactions fostered by the quality of density that counts. So, how do we foster density? Is this all just theoretical? No. If we know what this looks like, why don't we build it? Well, we would love to, but in most of the United States, it is literally illegal to build it. Single-family zoning, or so-called R1 zoning, dominates everything. R1 zoning dictates that only single-family homes can be built in an area with nothing else. No shops, no restaurants, no cafes, nothing. It dictates minimum lot sizes, minimum setbacks of homes from the street. This started in the 1920s with a Supreme Court case called Village of Euclid versus Amber Realty, where essentially they were trying to prevent the people in this town, this noxious factory, from being built right next to people's homes. And they decided to come up with zones in the city where you could only build a factory, or only build a house, or only build a school. This is a reasonable idea, but it metastasized into what we now eponymously call Euclidean zoning, which is a one-size-fits-all separation of uses. Industrial here, residential here, commerce somewhere else, with no diversity and no mixing of these uses. The unintended result of this is a nearly national ban on the form of housing that creates community, which is mid-rise mixed-use neighborhoods. We build two extremes. There are plenty of giant condo towers in downtown and plenty of single-family homes in the low-density suburbs, but what's called missing middle housing here in the middle literally does not exist because it's illegal to build in so many areas. This is the minority of housing type constructed, and is often, because it's so scarce, extremely unaffordable for most people. This is bad law and bad design that leads to bad psychological outcomes. Let's explore what this looks like here on the left in Chicago, on the middle in Charlotte, and on the right in New York City. These three maps in pink show areas of the city that are legally zoned for R1. If you see pink on this map, in that area, it is literally illegal to build anything that is not a single-family home. If it's blue, there's partial mixed use, and gray means essentially maximum flexibility, where you can have a total mixing of all uses with minimum requirements for things that can't be there, like you couldn't have a nuclear power plant, in the middle of Manhattan, that kind of thing. But otherwise, it's wide open. This pattern speaks for itself. Look at the relative amounts of color. The vast majority of urban land, and these are urban cities, is frozen in a century-old idea of false separation. If you cannot build shops, schools, or apartments near homes, everything becomes a car trip. If you are 5 miles deep in suburbia over in this area, the car is not a choice. It is life support. And a society that is built on forced driving is inevitably going to breed people that are anxious, time poor, and lonely. What else is causing this? Well, parking minimums. They are the quiet villain of urban misery. Mandated parking minimums, which are essentially a legal requirement to build a specific number of parking spaces based on arbitrary requirements for building type, such as 4 spaces per bowling lane or 1 space per bar stool, that kind of thing, depending on the building type, physically separates land uses, even in cities and areas of cities where mixed-use zoning is legal. So this is downtown Providence, Rhode Island, which the entire area is legal to be the maximum degree of mixed-use zoning, like you would see here in Midtown Manhattan. This area is still 27% parking by land area because of these the legal requirement to have parking minimums. So is this increasing freedom and increasing autonomy, or is it restricting personal freedom? This is sacrificing a quarter of a supposedly walkable area to car storage because the law requires it, and development leaders and builders have no ability to build anything else. They are not, parking minimums are not economics, they are pathology. In several cities such as Portland, Minneapolis, San Francisco, they have repealed them, proving that this is possible to not have these in your city. What about children? Children are the forgotten victims of this system. Jonathan Haidt's excellent book, The Anxious Generation, which mostly focuses on the harms of smartphone culture for children, makes the excellent point that when considering transit, zoning laws, permits, and new construction, we need to remember that kids are human beings. They want to be where the action is. Easily accessible mixed-use spaces where everyone young and old can hang out, see and be seen, do some playing, shopping, eating, flirting, and when tired, bench sitting. Make everyone more engaged with the world beyond the screen. When you can't move anywhere except your driveway and your yard as a child, autonomy of childhood is lost. It's difficult to bike to a friend's house unless they live 2 doors down. Even in areas where it's physically possible to walk, it's often not safe because of the road design we've already talked about. This is especially dire in the age of childhood obesity, where children need more physical activity than ever. Also, the risks we worry about with children are often misplaced. In 2022, FBI data shows about 296 kids were abducted by strangers. Is this horrible? Obviously, yes. But what's more horrible by the numbers is that in the same year, 1,129 children were killed in car crashes and 156,000 additional children were injured. The real monster lurking in the suburban imagination is not some cloaked stranger. It is just an SUV. When children cannot move freely, they lose independence and resilience, both of which are essential ingredients for healthy psychological development. Rush saw this coming 40 years ago in 1982 with their song Subdivisions. In the high school halls and the shopping malls, conform or be cast out. Subdivisions in the basement bars and the back of cars, be cool or be cast out. They're literalizing the psychological fragmentation of suburbia, conformity without community, isolation without identity. Suburbs literally subdivide not just the land, but also the human experience. Another indictment in art. What about transit, though? A lot of places have transit. Phoenix has transit. Augusta, Georgia, where I went to medical school, had transit. But having transit on paper does not mean you have transit in practice. This photo shows everything. A bare concrete bench, no shade, no sidewalk, and inches from a multi-lane arterial that's legally 35, but designed for 55 plus, and where everyone will drive as such. Do you want to wait on this bus stop bench for 30 minutes in July? A good transit system reduces mental load. You don't have to check your watch every minute or pray for a bus that is never going to show up. This kind of design neglects dignity. It doesn't matter how many routes exist. People will always drive when transit looks like this because it feels safer and saner. So let's bring this home to Phoenix. Downtown Phoenix is 21% parking by land area, 1 in every 5 square feet of the most dense area of our entire metro. Our so-called bike lanes, as I well know as someone who exclusively bikes to work, are often painted gutters with no protection wedged between speeding traffic and storm drains. Sprawl here is some of the worst in the country, and unless you live and work in downtown like I do, you are effectively imprisoned by the geography of the city, with your only escape hatch having 4 wheels and an ignition. For a city that tries to draw people by boasting 300 days of sunshine, and it is amazing from that respect, we've unfortunately designed it to make walking nearly impossible. But this is not inevitable. Phoenix could be a model for desert urbanism, but for now it is still a cautionary tale. Okay, how can we clinically counsel? We screen patients all the time for stress, trauma, sleep, but we never screen people for place-based exposures. When was the last time you asked your patient in any setting, how do you commute? Do you wish you could walk places but can't? What's the noise like? Do you lose sleep because of it? How hot is your home? These are not lifestyle curiosities. They are psychiatric risk factors. When you can, try to prescribe place-based movement to your patients. What is one thing your patient can do per week on foot? To get them out from behind the driver's seat. Aim for at least 7,500 steps a day. This is a tall order in a country where people take around 3,000 per day on average. That, again, to remind you, is the dose response point where mood and inflammation and circadian things start to normalize for a lot of patients. These are small, tiny interventions, but they will re-embed patients in their surroundings and reintroduce some small degree of subjectively perceived autonomy. So let's take this from clinic to community. We want to shift from micro to macro levels as we kind of wrap up the talk here. How can we extend our advocacy beyond the exam room? Well, We can counsel individuals forever until we're blue in the face, but until we fix design systemically, we will always be treating symptoms of bad planning. Think about smoking, for instance. It was ubiquitous in the 1960s, 1950s, but once it became inconvenient, expensive, taxed, and socially discouraged, rates of smoking collapsed from what they once were. Nobody banned nicotine receptors. Our brain still has just as many, but we've changed the environment. Car dependence is now, in 2025, the new secondhand smoke. You cannot fully opt out even if you want to, and most people in the moment don't realize that it's a problem because they don't know anything else. As a physician, we can advocate for healthier defaults, starting by abandoning NIMBY mindsets and saying YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, to dense infill transit sidewalk infrastructure. Write letters of support. Annoy your representatives. Ride transit yourself and feel what your patients feel in 110-degree heat waiting for a bus. It will change your empathy calibration. Call and email your council members. Be a thorn in their side. Do it all the time. Our voices have authority because we can connect the dots. These are not aesthetic issues. They are cardiovascular, respiratory, and psychiatric determinants of health. Let's reframe the narrative and anticipate objections. Okay, what about density causes stress? No, bad density causes stress. As we've already mentioned, it's the quality of the density, walkability, mixed uses, and greenery, which are directly protective. Well, transit is unsafe. I'm going to get stabbed to death on the train. Statistically, per mile injury and fatality rates are still far lower for public transit than for private cars. But until there's a critical mass of people riding public transit, there will never be the political will at the top level to make transit actually safe. So the more people that ride it, the better. Transit isolates people. No, loneliness falls with access to transit because mobility is agency. Do not confuse design failure with design principles and poor implementation of such. We're closing the loop now, and we're going to see fully how mental health and urbanism are kind of the same conversation from two lenses. So, walkable, transit-oriented, green, mixed-use neighborhoods reduce psychiatric stressors, period. Car-centric sprawl amplifies all negative exposures. We can screen for these exposures, we can counsel around them, and lend our voices to upstream reform. If design created the problem, if design created the problem, design can solve it. It is not about waiting for the next miraculous technology. Flying cars will solve this. No, it won't. Only changes in design will solve this. Let's look back over the learning objectives. We've met the goals. We've explored the mechanisms. We've contrasted sprawl's harms and density's benefits, and we've looked at concrete policy actions we can take. Look at Paris here on the top. People dining under an awning, fostering connection because of good design. On the bottom, Le Corbusier's brainchild of Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, built from the ground up in a swamp out of nothing with horrible design, the high modernist separation of all buildings and use types that breed alienation. This is therapy. This is pathology. So what do we really do from here? Well, here's a toolkit if you've thought this was interesting. Recommended reading: Walkable City by Jeff Speck, a practical guide everybody should read. Obviously, I recommend Urban Sprawl and Public Health that we already mentioned. Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan looks at interesting evolutionary mismatches between our evolutionary history and the built environment. Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott is very dense but is very good and looks at how high modernist technocratic planning fails. The Geography of Nowhere and Strong Towns by Charles Marone look at the fiscal and cultural decay caused by sprawl. Happy City is probably the best book for any psychiatrist to read, which is an emotional blueprint of urbanism. And Life After Cars by Sarah Goodyear and others, which was released just this month, has a fascinating section on mental health and auto-centric design, as well as a blueprint for redesigning things. And obviously, everyone should go to the original Bible of urbanism, The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, the matriarch of this domain. Additional resources online: Over the Urbanity, City Nerd, Strong Towns, and Not Just Bikes and City Beautiful all offer very interesting takes on all of these issues and deep dives as well. Here are my references, which you can look at later if you'd like. I would like to thank everybody for this, and as always, mention that this presentation, like all of them, are in memory of beautiful boy Theodore, who loved walkability more than anything because it just meant going outside for 30 minutes to smell the same bush. What questions can I answer for you guys? I see we have one comment from Dr. Cornelius. He would definitely choose changing a diaper over sitting in congested traffic for an hour. What can we do to improve our mental health if we are already living in the 5th largest city in America? Can listening to audiobooks on the drive-in, wearing earbuds, and having houseplants in our offices overcome the traffic, noise, and air pollution? This is a fantastic question. We are dealing with an issue here that does not have an immediate solution where you can just turn the key and fix everything. We can't have all 5+ million people in Phoenix decide to sell their homes to who? To no one, and move into, apartment blocks in the center of the city. That's absurd and is not what's being suggested. Dr. Cornelius has the right idea in that we should focus on things that we do immediately have agency over and change. Yes, houseplants and green space, even in your office, is good. Making the commute less monotonous by putting on an audiobook, but not to the point of being distracted, is helpful. Also, carpooling or seeing if it's possible to take transit with someone else. Walking in an area that you go to explore, even if you have to drive to that other part of the city to get there, park away from your destination and walk through it so that you can experience that area on foot, which often provides a radically different perspective on what an area looks like than you get when just driving through it. Hopefully that answers that question. Thank you for your kind words, Dr. Iskerica, as well. Any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just get on the mic. All right, looks like we don't have any other questions. I really appreciate everyone for joining. Also, thank you to my parents for joining from South Carolina, and for my old colleague, Dr. John Shenning, who's now a pediatric allergist and immunologist in Houston, for joining as well. Ironic that I ended up talking about Houston during him joining this. So I really appreciate all of you guys, and thank you again for the kind words, Wendy, Dr. Nguyen, Dr. Nichols, and Dr. Duong. If there's nothing else,